Good evening. My name is Maria Teresa Landi, and I'm a scientist at the National Institute of Health, and I'm also a member of the advisory board of the Crossroad Cultural Center that is among the organizers of the New York Encounter. Tonight, I have the great privilege to introduce three distinguished speakers. Professor Charles Townes, Nobel Prize winner in physics. Professor Kenneth Miller, a professor of biology at Brown University. And Msgr. Lorenzo Albacete, author, theologian, and a former scientist. Wow! Tonight, we will address one of the most widely discussed topics in academic and public life. Can an accomplished scientist be a genuine believer today? And we have asked the speakers to address this question starting from their experience. And I want to begin introducing Professor Townes. Just a few salient points among this long list of accomplishments. Professor Charles Townes received the Nobel Prize in 1964 for his role in the invention of the Msgr and laser. Since 1967, he has been a professor in the Graduate School of the University of California at Berkeley and is engaged in astrophysics research. Dr. Townes' major scientific work is in microwave spectroscopy, nuclear and molecular structure, quantum electronics, radio astronomy, and infrared astronomy. He holds the fundamental patent on masers, and with Dr. Schauler, the basic patent on lasers. In addition to the Nobel Prize, he has received a number of awards and honors, including the Templeton Foundation Prize, membership in the National Academy of Sciences, as well as honorary degrees from over 25 colleges and universities. Professor Townes, I'll let you have the floor.
There have been many people who felt that science and religion were contrary to each other and not consistent with each other, and hence there was a conflict. My point of view is very different than that, and I think increasingly people are giving up that kind of point of view. I think really science and religion are quite parallel and complementary to each other. They help each other. Now, what are they exactly? Well, I'll try to define them. I would say science is an attempt to understand our universe, what it's like, what it does, what it's like. Attempt to understand our universe, including human life and humans and so on, everything around us. That's science. What is religion? Well, religion is an attempt to understand the purpose and meaning of this universe. The purpose and meaning of this universe, all that's around us, but particularly including human life, of course. What is the purpose and meaning of this world and this life? So that's the difference, but if we understand how the systems work, then maybe we can understand its purpose and meaning. Because clearly the purpose and meaning have something to do with what it's like, and vice versa. So the two are related. They just look at things from a different point of view, and they're complementary. Now, I think in both cases, we need to examine things very carefully and open-mindedly. Science certainly examines things. We think of science as proving things, and religion is just having faith, postulates and faith. Well, that's not an accurate view of science at all. Science postulates things. And it has faith. It assumes laws, and it believes those laws occur. Believes those laws are obeyed, and it sometimes has to change them. Now, for example, and there are many really basic unknowns. For example, most of the matter in the universe isn't known by scientists. We know it's there, but we don't know what it is. I see you and me, and I see this, and we know all these things around us, but we know that our galaxies in this universe are being pulled by something, and we believe in gravity. Science has faith in the gravitational law, so as they're pulled by something, there's some mass there. There's something there. And that mass is greater than all the mass that we know, but we don't know what it is. We can't see it. We can't see it, we can't detect it, we don't know what it is. Maybe, well, we're working hard and trying to figure out what it is, and maybe someday we'll know. But at present, we don't know. But we have a postulate, you see, that the laws of gravity are produced, that gravity itself is produced by mass, and then hence we think there's mass there, and that's all the more matter in the universe than everything else that we know. Well, that's the kind of striking things that are uncertainties in science, and show, we have faith, we have belief, yes, it must be there, and they're puzzles. The same thing is true in religion, of course. We make postulates, and we have beliefs, and we think this is most likely right, and we think that's right, and so we act accordingly. Now, another interesting puzzle to science is the initiation of the universe. The universe had a beginning of all things. It suddenly exploded and existed. How do we know that? Well, I'm very proud that one of my students, Arno Penzias, discovered the Big Bang, so-called. He discovered radio radiation from way, way out there, coming from all directions, and we all eventually concluded that had to come from a Big Bang, the universe exploding. And we know that the universe is expanding. We can see things moving apart all the time, and moving at such a speed that we know about how long ago it occurred. It occurred about a little more than 13 billion years ago. The universe had a beginning. It started with a Big Bang, just an explosion, and it's still expanding and expanding. We can see it expanding. Now, that was a surprise to many scientists. For example, Einstein said, oh, no, the universe can't have a beginning. No, it doesn't make sense. It can't have a beginning. How can it possibly have a beginning? But as the scientific information began to come in and so on, he eventually was convinced, well, for goodness sake, it had a beginning. How? How? That's a puzzle for science. Of course, it's very suggestive to religion. And so you see, this shows you right away how science and religion can relate to each other. Science has proved the universe had a beginning. It was started somehow 13 billion years ago. Religion says God created it. There was a creator. And this indicates, yes, there was a creator and a creation. Now, in addition, we know that the laws of science are almost just right so we can be here. They have to be almost exactly the way they are for us to be here and be what we are and have all the abilities we have and so on. All the laws of science have to be almost exactly the way they are, things to be this way. Wow, why did it turn out that way? Again, you see, it's very indicative, very suggestive at least, of a designer, a planner, a design. It was designed, it was planned. Now, there are some scientists that say, oh no, It just happened to turn out this way. There are lots and lots of universes, billions and billions of universes, and they're all different, and this one turned out this way, and that's why we're here. Well, they can say that, but that's purely a postulate. There's no way of testing it. No way of testing, no way of seeing these other universes if they're out there. So you see, some scientists make postulates, and they can believe that if they wish, but to me it doesn't seem highly likely. There had to be such an enormous number of universes for things to turn out exactly right this way without it being planned. So the initiation of the universe is a puzzle of science. Why it's made the way it is, exactly so we can be here, and so on. Now, there's another thing is the initiation of life. We know that life on Earth began only once. Began about maybe 4 or 5 billion years ago, and we're all related. All life on Earth is related. How do we know that? We know that from the molecules. We're made of molecules, and certain molecules can be left-handed or right-handed. We all have some left-handed molecules that are similar. Wow. Well, maybe it was a right-handed type that was created once and then it died out or something, but life couldn't have been created many times. Created only once. Why and how did it begin? Well, we can sort of imagine how it might begin. The molecules just happened to come together accidentally in the right way. Boy, it's highly improbable, but just the right way. We can imagine that, but we can't prove it. We can't do it ourselves. We can't put molecules together that way. Maybe someday we'll learn enough about life. We know that we'll be able to reproduce it, but not now. We don't know. Now, then, there's a puzzle of free will. Most of us think we can do things. I think I can put my hand this way or that way whenever I want to. Oh, science doesn't allow free will. Our present science says no, there can't be any free will. Quantum mechanics says no, things are not predictable. Exactly what happens is not predictable, but nobody has control. There's nothing that can have control according to science. Well, how many people believe that? I think almost everybody thinks they have free will. They can make some free choices. Maybe not, they can't choose everything, but they can make some free choices. They've got some free will. This exists. It's quite contrary to science. Of course, it's very much a part of religion that God has given us some free will, made us like himself, able to do things, able to do new things. Well, is it real? Well, I think it is, and we all have that instinct, of course. We think we have free will, we can make some free choices. I don't think I'm just sort of automatically what the molecules tell me to do, that's what I do, that's why I'm here, and that's what I'm saying. Oh, I can't believe that. Now, also science also tells us something about the effects of religion on life. Psychologists and biologists have studied the effects of religion on life, seen in general it expands and enlarges and helps life. But the effects of religion on life, you see, this is the way science and religion do interact. They're very parallel. They're dealing with the same universe. They just look at it from little different ways, but they tell each other something. And religion has told science something. What? Well, for example, it told science that the universe had a beginning and told it it's planned. So we have free will, and it's planned, and that's the laws of science the way they are. Now, revelations, we believe in revelations in religion or revelations in science. Well, maybe. Let me tell you how the laser began. I had worked for many years doing spectroscopy with wavelengths about a half a centimeter long. I wanted to get them shorter. I could get them down a little bit shorter. Not much. I was using electronic oscillators, and the electronic oscillators couldn't oscillate faster than that. I worked on it. I was appointed the chairman of a national committee to see how to get down to shorter wavelengths, the fast oscillators, get down to shorter wavelengths, down maybe to a millimeter or shorter, and down into the infrared. We travel all over the country, interviewing people, seeing if anybody had any ideas. And after a year's time, this national committee met in Washington, said, well, we'll have to write a report saying we just don't find any answers. Well, I woke up early in the morning worrying about this. I went out and sat in a park bench. This was in Franklin Park, Washington, D.C. I remember it very well. It was a bright Sunday morning. I sat on the park bench, and why hadn't we been able to get any ideas how to get to shorter wavelengths, get oscillators with shorter wavelengths? We've tried this and we've tried that and so on. No, it doesn't work. My students have tried this and that didn't work, and nobody seemed to have any ideas what else to do. I said, well, of course, molecules and atoms can produce short waves. They can produce light and infrared and light. They can produce short waves, but we can't produce an oscillator with them. They don't amplify. Oh, wait a minute. We know atoms and molecules, they can be in an upper state and a lower state. And if they drop down from the upper state, they emit light. If they go from the lower state to the upper light, they absorb. And thermodynamics says there has to be more in the lower state than the upper state, so there's more absorption than emission. So if you send light through a bunch of atoms or molecules, it gets absorbed. It doesn't get amplified. But hey, what we have to do is get more atoms up here than down here, and then we send light through, and then there'll be more emission than absorption, and we get amplification. Wow! I pulled out a piece of paper and pencil and wrote down some equations. Say, oh, it looks to me like it's really possible. Wow. Was that a revelation? A sudden idea. You know, people worked and worked. I'd worked and worked on this for many years. Sudden idea. How did it occur? I don't know. It suddenly came to me. A revelation. Well, I knew that people would question this and so on, and I didn't have it all tried out yet, so I thought, well, I won't tell the committee about it. I'll just go home and see what I can do. If I didn't tell the committee, and we wrote our report saying, no, we hadn't found any answers. Well, I went home and I persuaded a student, Jim Gordon, to work on this and try to build one. I thought I'd build one first at microwave wavelengths because I had a lot of equipment for that. I thought I'd build one to amplify using ammonia molecules, amplify the wavelength from about a half a centimeter, half an inch, about 1 centimeter, half an inch roughly, and try and see if it'd work. So Jim Gordon agreed to try to do his thesis on this. He'd been working on it for 6 months or so, maybe a year, and the head of the department and the previous head of the department, Professor Robbie and Professor Cush, both of whom had got Nobel Prizes in physics, so they're not bad physicists, they came into my laboratory and said, look, Charlie, that's not going to work. We know it's not going to work. You know it's not going to work. You've got to stop. Well, fortunately, I had my title was associate professor then. An associate professor can't be fired just because he's stupid. If he does something morally wrong, he can be fired, but not just because he makes a mistake. So I said, no, I think it has a chance of working. I'm going to keep at it. Oh, well, they marched out of my laboratory angrily and so on. Well, about 6 months later, Jim Gordon had it working. He came in my classroom and said, hey, it's working. Boy, everybody in the class got up and went and said, yes. He was amplifying waves with molecules. Now, a lot of people had come by and looked at my work and, oh, yeah, that's kind of interesting, but nobody had tried to copy me. There was no competition because nobody took it very seriously.
That's great.
I was lucky that enabled us to go ahead and build one before anybody else did. We called it the Msgr, for microwave amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. And as soon as that got to work, then everybody got excited, and lots of competition. Everybody tried to make one, and make one various kinds, and they made all kinds of different varieties. It was a very exciting field. Nobody thought of getting the much shorter wavelengths. They didn't think you'd get the much shorter wavelengths. Well, that's what I wanted to do. Well, after about a year, I sat down and said, well, I want to get down to shorter wavelengths now. Let me see just how I do it. And I sat down and wrote it all down. Oh, looks like I can get right on down to light waves. Wow. And Art Sharlow had been a postdoc with me. I talked to him about it. Oh, yes, that's interesting. Can I work on it with you? So he did, and Art Sharlow and I worked on it together, and he added some ideas. And so we published a paper on how to make this get the shorter wavelengths, a paper we call optical masers. Masers with microwave amplification by stimulated emission, but we wanted to push them on the light. We called it optical masers. Pretty soon, after that paper was published, everybody jumped in and they called them lasers for light amplification by stimulated emission of radiation. Light amplification. I've often said, well, maybe the systems that work in the infrared, we should call them erasers for infrared amplification. But something else was already called erasers, so infrared systems are lasers. So anything at 1 millimeter or longer, that's a maser. 1 millimeter shorter, that's a laser, but there's really no difference. Now, just to show you the doubts about new ideas, I told Art Sharlow that he and I were working with Bell Labs. I was consulting Bell Labs. He was working at Bell Labs. I said, well, I guess we ought to give the patent to Bell Labs. You take the Bell Labs lawyers. Well, he called me up the next day and said, Bell Labs lawyers said they don't want to patent it because the light's never been used for communication, and so they're not interested. I said, well, now wait a minute. Just because they don't understand, we shouldn't cheat Bell Labs lawyers. You go tell them, yes, it can be used for communication. So he called me up the next day and said, well, they say, okay, if we can show how it can be used for communication, they'll patent it for Bell Labs. So, okay, we gave the patent to Bell Labs. Well, that was a revelation. A laser. Now, again, let me emphasize the parallelism between science and religion. They're both trying to understand this universe. One is how it works, and the other is the purpose and meaning. And they are related, of course. And they are trading off and giving each other ideas. And does science have revelations? Yes, I think probably so. Now, we have to recognize also that all our beliefs in science are not necessarily right. I mentioned that there's all this dark matter. We don't know what in the world it is. We think it's there because of our belief in gravity. And then there's dark energy, which represents even more mass. We've recently discovered that the universe is being pushed apart by dark energy. That's even more mass. That's about 20 times the mass that we see around us or we know about. Dark matter is about 5 times the mass that we know about. So most of the matter in the universe we don't really know. Science says it's there, but what in the world is it? Well, you see, there are many things we don't know in science. How the world began, what's most of the matter in the universe. Also free will. How can we have free will? There are many things we don't understand. And science has to recognize that, and it does. More and more, we recognize that science is preliminary. It's remarkably successful to predict and do a lot of things, but some of it may be wrong. And there are new things to be found out, modifications. Now, the same is true of religion. We can't pretend that we know completely all about religion. We want to know as much as we can, understand as much as we can. Some of it may be wrong, but let's use it as best we can. So in both science and religion, we want to try hard to understand, use all the information and knowledge and reasoning we can, and beliefs to understand what's there. And we figure out what we think is most likely right, and then we live by it, use it and live by it, even though we know we may not be perfect, we may not know everything, but let's understand as much as we can, and live accordingly in both science and religion. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Towns, to really help us to understand how deeply are things connected in science and faith. The beginning of life, the beginning of the universe, as you said, the free will, everything can be explored from the different points of view, as you said, how it works and what's the meaning, right? I hope we will have more time at the end to further discuss this. And the format of this presentation is that after each lecture, we'll have a couple of questions. I will ask a couple of questions to all the speakers, so we can even deeply go down into these topics. And I want to just move quickly now to Professor Miller. Dr. Kenneth Miller is a professor of biology at Brown University, where he returned in 1980 after spending 6 years at Harvard University. His work on cell membrane structure and function has produced more than 60 scientific papers and reviews in leading journals. Miller is a co-author with Joseph Levine of 4 different high school and college biology textbooks, which are used by millions of students nationwide. He has received 6 major teaching awards at Brown, the Presidential Citation of the American Institute for Biological Science in 2005, and the Public Service Award of the American Society for Cell Biology in 2006. In 2009, he was honored by the American Association for the Advancement of Science for advancing the public understanding of science, and he also received the Mendel Medal from Villanova University. He's the author of Finding Darwin's God, a scientist's search for common ground between God and evolution, and also Only a Theory, Evolution and a Battle for American Souls. And I just learned during lunch that actually Professor Miller gave the inaugural lecture of the annual lecture series dedicated to Professor Towns at MIT. So there is already a link between the two speakers that I didn't know. So Professor Miller.
Thank you very much. I'd like to thank the Encounter for inviting me here today, and especially for the honor of sharing the platform with Professor Towns and Msgr. Albacete. It's a great honor, and I'm enormously happy to be here. I'm a biologist, and what we face as biologists sometimes amount to what you'll see in the billboard on the very first slide. And there it is, which is, if we evolved from monkeys, why are monkeys still here? There's actually a quick answer to that, although I'm not going to go into it now. But it fits into a stereotype. And you can see it in the cover of this book, The History of Warfare Between Science and Christendom. And the stereotype that implies, and you can see it in the bottom of the slide if you'll advance the next animation, is that science and faith are drawn into inexorable conflict. And there are plenty of examples of that in our present culture. A good example is what happened in a county in Georgia a couple of years ago. They decided they would purchase new biology textbooks for the 13 high schools in the county, but they were so concerned about the way evolution was treated in one of these textbooks, and you can see the cover of the book right up there, and this might be familiar to some of the younger people in the audience. And you might also notice my name on the cover. Yes, that was my book, along with Joe Levine. And they were so concerned about these books that they stuck a warning label on the books. And the warning label read like this. And basically it says that, you know, this book contains material on evolution. Evolution is a theory, not a fact, on the origin of living things. Students are urged to do things like study carefully, be critical, and keep an open mind. And I still remember when a reporter for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution called me up after these stickers went on the books. And she started the interview by saying, "Dr. Miller, aren't you outraged at the stickers they've put on your books?" And I've been interviewed before, but I'd never had an interviewer put a word in my mouth like outraged. And then I realized she's trolling for a quote. She wants me to say something inflammatory so she can write an article in the newspaper with a headline like "Author Incensed," or even better, "Northern Author Upset at What They've Done to His Books." So I decided I would not give her the pleasure. And I said, "No, I like the stickers." She said, "You do?" I said, "I think the stickers are great. They just don't go far enough." And I tried to explain that by saying students should keep a critical and open mind when they study evolution was unfair to science. And she said, "You mean to the science of evolution?" And I said, "No, I'm a cell biologist. It's unfair to cell biology because it implies that everything in my field is pretty well figured out. It's only evolution that's a little shaky." I said, "I'll tell you what I'll do. No charge. I will rewrite the sticker for the schools in Cobb County. And up you'll see right now is a sticker that I would be proud to have on my book. And it reads something like, "This book has material on science. It contains information on scientific theories, which are based in scientific fact. Everything in science should be subject to critical analysis and open debate," and so forth. Well, sadly, the school district didn't take me up on my very generous offer. As you'll see in the next slide, they were taken to court by a local citizen. You can see the picture. He's the short guy there. Jeffrey Selman, a native New Yorker, I would point out, who sued the Cobb County Board of Education. I actually testified in that trial, and in 2004, a federal judge ruled that these stickers violated the First Amendment to the Constitution because they were an effort to advance a particular religious view. Now you can see the headline as to how this was written up in a lot of places, and I'm older and wiser now, and I realize now that if Associated Press reporter calls you up and asks you for a comment, your name is liable to be in the first sentence of an article that will appear the next day in 1,000 newspapers, which my name did. And you should have seen my email inbox that evening. All the ones that I remember are the ones that said, "You're going to burn in hell." And it was very, very clear that that's what a lot of people, and I actually wrote back to all of those people, said, "Well, maybe so. But if I do, it's not going to be an account of evolution. It's going to be kind of something else I've done that you don't have any idea about." Well, this event in Georgia was a small affair, to be perfectly honest. A larger affair occurred about a year later in a school district in Pennsylvania. And that school district adopted a policy requiring their teachers to teach something called intelligent design. The teachers refused, but the school board persisted with the policy and actually wrote its own intelligent design lesson, which it had read to students. As a result, 11 parents in the district filed a lawsuit. And what happened in the fall of 2005 was a trial. I had the honor, although I'm not sure that's the right word, of being the lead witness for the parents in that trial. And this was an extraordinary event. It was widely covered in the media. In the next slide, you'll see the NBC TV courtroom sketch, and that is me being cross-examined during the first 2 days of the trial. My cross-examination went on for more than 9 hours. The trial itself went on for more than 7 weeks. In fact, I should tell you something. The last day of the trial, the attorneys sum up, of course. The attorney representing the school board got up to make his closing statement. He fiddled with his dayminder. Nobody knew what he was doing. And he looked up and he said, "Your Honor, I'm not sure if you're aware of this, but this trial has gone on for 40 days and 40 nights. It was then we had an idea which way the judge would rule, because he then leaned forward from the bench and said, but it wasn't by design. And as you'll see, in December 2005, right before Christmas, the decision was announced, and the decision was an overwhelming win for science. And the judge, who incidentally is a lifelong Republican and a George W. Bush appointee, ruled that intelligent design simply wasn't science. This was reported in newspapers, television outlets all over the country, and it set off rejoicing inside the town of Dover. And it's important to remember that it was the parents who complained about this policy. Now, one of the things that's interesting that happened during this trial is time and time again, I heard news reports saying things like, it's God versus science in a Pennsylvania courtroom. But the interesting thing about that is of the 11 parents, 7 are professing Christians, 2 are Sunday school teachers, and 1 actually runs a summer Bible camp. Of the expert witnesses, 3 of us were Christians, and 1 is a professor of theology at Georgetown University. People of faith were very much on the side of science. And this came to some people, although certainly not to most of us, from surprising quarters. One of our most vocal supporters was Father George Coyne, then at that time the director of the Vatican Observatory. And Father Coyne was outspoken in saying that intelligent design profanes science. It cheapens God. It reduces the vision of creation. That's from a clergyman and a scientist. How about from a scientist deeply involved in the theory of evolution itself? Well, the greatest evolutionary geneticist of the 20th century was the late Theodosius Dobzhansky. And Dobzhansky is famous not just for his fundamental contributions to evolution, but for writing a marvelous article. And the title of that article, which you'll see now, says it all. Nothing in biology makes sense except in the light of evolution. And that's absolutely true. It's a statement to which any biologist would subscribe. But in that article, there are some remarkable statements. Here, for example, and you'll see one of them, and that is that the organic diversity in life, the organic diversity of life is reasonable and understandable if they're not the products of caprice by a creator, but rather the product of evolution. And Dobzhansky went on, and he said, it is wrong to hold creation and evolution as mutually exclusive alternatives. I, meaning Dobzhansky, am a creationist and an evolutionist. Why did he say that? He said because evolution is God's or nature's method of creation. And then very significantly, creation is not an event that happened in 4004 BC. It is a process that began billions of years ago and is still going on today. One of our allies in this struggle has been, in fact, Pope Benedict. And here you'll see some interviews that he gave to Italian journalists in which he called the creation-evolution clash is an absurdity. And his exact words were these: the contrast is an absurdity because there are many scientific tests in favor of evolution which appears as a reality that we must see and which enriches our understanding of life and being. And that's kind of technical Vatican speak language. So if you do what I do when I'm confused by complicated language, go to the New York Post. Evolution and God do mix, Pope. And you couldn't have said it any better than that. Now, the topic which we are all considering today, in effect, is a topic that 11 or 12 people were actually asked to write about a couple of years ago by the Templeton Foundation. And these essays are still online. And that is, does science, modern science, make a belief in God obsolete? And of the people who wrote for this, about 4 of them said, yes, it does. Another 4 said, no, it doesn't. I wrote, of course not. And a few others hemmed and hawed one way or another. The reaction to these published essays was so favorable and so interesting that the organizer of the event called me up and asked me if I would be willing to debate someone in print. And I said, sure, that'd be fun. Who you want me to debate? And the answer was Christopher Hitchens. So if you are interested, you can still find, the URL is up there at the Templeton Organization website, a 3-part print debate between myself and Christopher Hitchens on this issue. And I think you'll find it illuminating, if only because I think I was able to strip away from Mr. Hitchens the pretension that science has indeed disproven the existence of God. Now, the interesting thing about that, and I don't think Mr. Hitchens was aware of that, is that religious belief is actually pretty common among working scientists. This is an article published in Nature a little more than a decade ago, in which thousands of working scientists from AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science, were surveyed. 45% or so of the people surveyed professed simple disbelief in a supreme being. About 14.5% said not sure. But almost 40%, 39.6%, professed a belief in a personal God to whom one could pray and can intervene in human affairs. It's a very conventional kind of belief. And here's what's interesting. The questions in the survey duplicated a series of questions asked of AAAS by its members in 1917. And the percentages in 1917 were almost exactly the same as they were in the late 1990s. I think one of the people who put this whole struggle, especially about evolution in context, was the columnist Charles Krauthammer, who writes for the Washington Post. And at the conclusion of that trial in which I testified, as you can see, he wrote, "Phony theory, false conflict. How ridiculous to make evolution the enemy of God. What could be," and this is paraphrasing because I can't read the whole slide from here, "what could be more elegant, more simple, more creative, indeed more divine, than a planet with millions of life forms, distinct and yet interactive, all ultimately derived from a single double-stranded molecule, pliable and fecund enough to give us mollusks and mice, Newton and Einstein, even if it also gave us the Kansas Board of Education." Nonetheless, it's true that faith in the popular sense is still considered to be a contradiction of scientific reason. And I can think of no better example of this than last year when, and you'll see the cover of Time magazine here, these are two of the great pioneers of the Human Genome Project, Craig Venter and Francis Collins. When Francis Collins was nominated by President Obama to head the National Institutes of Health, there was general support, strong support among active research scientists, but not from what I might call the anti-faith community. In particular, Sam Harris wrote an impassioned op-ed piece in the New York Times, and the gist of Mr. Harris's, now Dr. Harris's, reasoning was this: Christians believe a lot of really stupid things. Francis Collins is a Christian, and therefore he believes a lot of really stupid things. No one who believes a lot of really stupid things should run the NIH. Well, I was very quick to write a letter in response, which the New York Times was kind enough to publish. I wasn't alone. There was a flurry of letters in support of Dr. Collins, who has been confirmed unanimously, I might add, by the Senate, and I think whose track record as the director of the NIH, maybe for biologists, the single most important scientific institution in the world, his track record has been absolutely extraordinary. Nonetheless, this goes on. Only a few months ago, a colleague and a friend of mine, Jerry Coyne, from the University of Chicago, published an op-ed piece in USA Today, with a broader readership than the New York Times in some respect. And what he argued, and you can see the essence of the argument here, is this. Let's advance the slide once or twice. Let's advance it one more time. So here's Coyne's argument in a sense. Science and faith are fundamentally incompatible. Now, there are people who are religious and are scientists, but all that means is that these people hold contradictory ideas in their head, and anybody can believe that. Religion rejects doubt and demands certainty. Science, on the other hand, embraces doubt and demands evidence. Science finds the truth, and religion doesn't. And that's why religion breeds war and conflict, because it has no way to settle these questions of truth. Now, Jerry's entitled to his opinion, but I think there's a flaw in his reasoning. And this flaw is common among scientists who argue that science can exclude faith. And that is, he expects faith to work just like science, to reveal empirical truth. The reality is, that's not what faith is all about. You might ask yourself, did Jesus appear to teach us the calculus, to describe the atomic structure of matter, or to invent the microscope? The answer is, of course not. The purpose of faith, even the purpose of revelation, is entirely different. I think you get a much more accurate view of the boundary between faith and science if you look for the person who actually developed the mathematical foundation for cosmic expansion. In other words, what we call the Big Bang. Now, that person's picture is on this slide, but it wasn't the person I put up there first. It's the person to the left of Einstein. And you'll notice he's wearing a Roman collar. His name is Father Georges Lemaitre. He's a Belgian priest trained in mathematics and physics, and it was he who first pointed out the mathematics in general relativity that demanded an expanding universe. Because he was a priest, Father Lemaitre was often asked, doesn't this contradict the Bible? And here's what he said. He said, the writers of the Bible were illuminated, more or less, some more than others, on the question of salvation. On other questions, they were just as wise or ignorant as their generation. Hence, it is utterly unimportant if errors of history or scientific fact should be found in the Bible, especially if those errors relate to events that were not directly observed by those who wrote about them. He went on. The idea that they must be right on all other subjects is simply the fallacy of people who have an incomplete understanding of why we were given the Bible at all. As a scientist, I often find myself turning, believe it or not, to St. Augustine to see the proper relationship between scientific rationality and truth. Augustine was an extraordinarily enlightened guy. And one of the things that he observed was, as you can see, that the universe was brought into being in a less than fully formed state, but was gifted to transform itself from unformed matter into a truly marvelous array of structures and life forms, almost an evolutionist. Now, I have to say, when I have shown that slide, once I showed that slide to an audience of scientists, and somebody got up and said, well, that's fine that you like Augustine, but what kind of science would you get if you followed the precepts of a weird 5th century mystic like Augustine? And knowing this person's field, a big grin came across my face. And I said, I want to tell you about someone who was so transfixed, you'll see his picture now, by the work of Augustine, that he entered an order of priests founded according to the precepts of Augustine. He was a very religious guy. He was respected by his peers. In fact, he was elected the abbey of the Augustinian monastery of St. Thomas in Brunn, in what is today the Czech Republic. Now, at one point in his life, this Augustinian priest got interested in what today you and I would recognize as a scientific question. He was interested in how plants pass their characteristics along from one generation to another. So what did he do? Did he pray? Of course he prayed. Did he read scripture? Of course he did. But to answer the scientific question, you want to know what he did? He went into the garden and did experiments. The name of that Augustinian priest was Father Gregor Mendel, the founder of the modern science of genetics. What do you get when you do science according to Augustinian precepts? The answer is you get genetics. And I think that's as profound a statement as one can make about the compatibility of science and faith. So here's what I'd like to close with. I think it is self-evident that science is done and is done well by theists, by people of faith. My evidence of that is 40% of the working scientists in the United States profess to be people of faith. Now, why is that? I think it's simple. And that is the first devotion of any Christian, certainly any person of faith, should be to the truth. And that's also the devotion of science. Secondly, there really is no scientific fact, principle, or theory that contradicts the idea of a creator God that is responsible for the universe as we know it and as we investigate it through science. Now, that's true, even though a lot of really flawed arguments for the existence of such a God have been predicated on scientific ignorance. As I argued in the first popular book I wrote several years ago, we ought to be able to find God not in the dark recesses of our ignorance about science, but in the bright light of what we know and understand about the universe. Secondly, the evidence for that God is not the sort of empirical scientific evidence that somebody like Jerry Coyne or Sam Harris would demand. And the reason for that is the existence of empirical evidence would make God an ordinary part of nature. And as Aquinas recognized, that means he would not be God at all. To a theist, the evidence for God is immaterial, but not less real. Now, how can the immaterial be real? I would argue it can be real in the same way that truth can be real. When you and I argue passionately for any point of view, even if we argue against religion. In so doing, we affirm the value and the reality of truth, and truth is a non-material concept. Finally, I think it's important for religious people to accept science, evolution in particular. There are a lot of reasons for this. In a religious nation like the United States, that is the only way to achieve general support for science. And secondly, I think it is intellectually and philosophically the correct position as well. It's interesting to note that Albert Einstein, although not a religious person himself, recognized the religious roots of the scientific impulse. And what he wrote once was that the achievements of science have been inspired by the truly religious conviction that this universe is something perfect and susceptible to the rational striving for knowledge. What kind of God could exist in a scientific world in which nature follows predictable laws that we can investigate and understand? The answer is a God who fashioned a world that is both rational and intelligible. And finally, to people of faith, God is not the antithesis of scientific reason. God is the reason why science works in the first place. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Miller. We will explore this further, I'm sure. It was amazing because being at NIH, I really experienced this battle, and the fact that you discussed about, the nomination of Collins as the director at NIH. I was there. I remember all the debate, even within the institute, precisely on this point. Is there a contradiction or not? Well, there is the different point of view. Anyway, we will discuss this further after the presentation of Msgr. Albacete. Just a few words of introduction. Msgr. Lorenzo Albacete, author, theologian, and New York Times Magazine contributor, is a physicist by training. He holds a degree in space science and applied physics, as well as a master's degree in sacred theology from the Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He also holds a doctorate in sacred theology from the Pontifical University of St. Thomas in Rome. He is co-founder and has been a professor at the John Paul II Institute in Washington, D.C. He has taught at St. Joseph's Seminary in Yonkers, in New York, and from 1996 to 1997 served as president of Catholic University of Puerto Rico in Ponce. He has been advisor on Hispanic affairs to the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops and has appeared or has been interviewed on CNN, The Charlie Rose Show, PBS, EWTN. Msgr. Albacete is also the author of God at the Ritz, Attraction to Infinity, and he's also the chairman of the board of advisors of the Crossroad Cultural Center. Msgr. Albacete.
Thank you. Really, after listening to the other two introductions, and brilliant careers, what a Mickey Mouse background I have. I absolutely have no shame in appearing here with such illustrious people.
Don't tell me.
I have not won the Nobel Prize. I did win the little arithmetic star in kindergarten. I don't even know how the so-called smartphone works. And as to biology, all I know is how to cut off frogs. Because the normal biology teacher in my high school got sick or something, and they asked this nun who knew nothing about biology to take over, and we spent the entire semester cutting up frogs. But I have debated Christopher Hitchens, only that he accused me of being an atheist. Still, here we go. I began to prepare for this presentation. The fact that I prepared for it may surprise many. During the Christmas season, sometimes I was reflecting on the relation between science and faith. Other times I thought about the meaning of Christmas. According to my Latin American, Spanish, and Puerto Rican cultural tradition, at least when I was growing up, the heart of Christmas was the solemnity of the Epiphany, or as we called it, la venida de los tres santos reyes magos, the coming of the three holy magician kings. In Spain, this was the day children received their presents from the three kings, though in Puerto Rico we also expected gifts from Santa Claus on Christmas Day. And many times he proved to be more generous than the three holy kings, who also required food for their camels in exchange for their gifts. At one point in my musings, however, the two topics came together. Yes, science and faith, and the Magi. So I thought that it would be interesting if I offered to you my thoughts on science and faith in terms of the biblical account of the encounter between the Magi and the newborn Jesus. First of all, there is the story. I mean, if you don't know it, well, I'm sorry, there's no time to. I have it here. You could find it in the internet. You can Google. No, it's all right. I mean, what the heck? Everybody knows it, except the person who decorated my Christmas tree, who wanted to put 9 kings down. The Bible doesn't really say how many there were. Who were these mysterious figures called the Magi? Popularly referred to as wise men and kings. The word Magi is a Latinization of the plural of the Greek word magos, itself from the old Persian magus, referring to the priestly caste of Zoroastrianism. As part of their religion, these priests paid particular attention to the stars and gained an international reputation for astrology, which was at that time highly regarded as a science. Their religious practices and use of astrology caused the derivatives of the term magi to be applied to the occult in general and led to the English term magic, translated in the King James Version as wise men. The same translation is applied to the wise men led by Daniel in the Old Testament. The same word is also translated as sorcerer when describing Elymas the sorcerer, Acts of the Apostle 13:6-11. And of course the famous Simon Magus, considered a heretic by the early church, in Acts 8:9-13. The Zoroastrian Magi, they are calling, do turn this off. Let me see. Hi, Joe. No, I'm speaking here on some science and faith routine, okay? I'll call you back. Joseph Ratzinger, it was Joseph. Look, act seriously. This is a serious performance. The Zoroastrian Magi in Matthew's Gospel were indeed motivated by religious reasons to study the star, but their studies themselves were pursued without religious prejudices. They were searching for laws of nature that revealed an order, a logos, a cosmos with a permanent structure that dispelled the fear of chaos which is present in the primordial religious experiences of the human being. Experience of the mystery of existence has this aspect of fear of chaos and propels a search for order, for rationality. In that sense, these Magi could be called scientists. In his commentary on Matthew's Gospel, in Volume 1 of the book Heart of the World, Erasmo Leivas Merikakis writes, quote, "Like good scientists, the Magi take a more cosmic, a more all-encompassing view of things. In these pagans, we encounter a perfect unity between patient science and moral justice. The wise man seeks truth, and when he finds it, he does not hesitate to adore it, to subject himself to it. Their example shows adoration as the end of all scientific and philosophical search." What an amazing thought. At the end, there is an act of adoration. Another characteristic of the Magi's discovery of the new star is joy. Not merely a mental satisfaction as when solving a problem or finding an answer to a problem, but an existential satisfaction, an interior vibration of the heart, filled with wonder, wonder at the existence of the reality, revealing its secrets, so to speak. What true scientist has not experienced this joy, this wonder, this awe before a deeper knowledge of reality, listening to Professor here, sitting in Franklin Park in Washington. By the way, I saw you sitting there writing this. Sitting, I could see this joy. The question we face today is whether this experience of joyful wonder is possible, or whether we have to resign ourselves to a relativism that reduces everything, scientific research included, to subjectivism. Consider the observations of Jonah Lehrer in his recent article in the New Yorker magazine a few weeks ago. The article's title is "The Truth Wears Off. Is there something wrong with the scientific method?" He says, on September 18, 2007, a few dozen neuroscientists, psychiatrists, and drug company executives gathered in a hotel conference room in Brussels to hear some startling news. It had to do with a class of drugs known as atypical or second-generation antipsychotics, which came on the market in the early 90s. The drugs had been tested on schizophrenics in several large clinical trials, all of which had demonstrated a dramatic decrease in the subject's psychiatric system. As a result, second-generation antipsychotics had become one of the fastest growing and most profitable pharmaceutical classes. But the data presented at Brussels meeting made it clear that something strange was happening. The therapeutic power of the drugs appeared to be steadily waning. A recent study showed an effect that was less than half of that documented in the first trials in the early 1990s. Many researchers began to argue that the expensive pharmaceuticals weren't any better than the first generation antipsychotics, which had been in use since the 50s. You see, before the effectiveness of a drug can be confirmed, it must be tested and tested again. Different scientists in different labs need to repeat the protocols and publish their results. The test of replicability, as it is known, is the foundation of modern research. Replicability is how the community enforces itself. It's a safeguard for the creep of subjectivity. Most of the time, scientists know what results they want, and that can indeed influence the results they get. But the promise of replicability is that the scientific community can correct for these flaws. But now, all sorts of well-established, multiply confirmed findings have started to look increasingly uncertain. It's as if our facts were losing their truth. Claims that had been considered and enshrined in textbooks are suddenly shown to be unprovable. This phenomenon doesn't yet have an official name, but it's occurring across a wide range of fields, said this article. For many scientists, the effect is especially troubling because of what it exposes about the scientific process. If replication is what separates the rigor of science from the squishiness of pseudoscience, where do we put all these rigorously validated findings that can no longer be proved? Which results should we believe? Francis Bacon, the early modern philosopher and pioneer of the scientific method, once declared that experiments were essential because they allowed us to put nature to the question. But now it appears that nature often gives different answers. This suggests that the decline effect is actually the decline of illusion. Many scientific theories continue to be considered true even after failing numerous experimental tests. Even the law of gravity hasn't always been perfect at predicting real-world phenomena. The author gives some examples of that. Such anomalies demonstrate, says the author, the slipperiness of empiricism. Although many scientific ideas generate conflicting results and suffer from falling effect sizes, they continue to get cited in the textbooks and drive standard medical practice. Why? Because these ideas seem true, because they seem to make sense, because we can't bear to let them go. And this is why the decline effect is so troubling. Not because it reveals the human fallibility of science, in which data are tweaked and beliefs shape perceptions. Such shortcomings aren't surprising, at least for scientists. And not because it reveals that many of our most exciting theories are fleeting fads and will soon be rejected. This idea has been around a long time. The decline effect is troubling because it reminds us of how difficult it is to prove anything. We like to pretend that our experiments define the truth for us, but that's often not the case. Just because an idea is true doesn't mean it can be proved. And just because an idea can be proved doesn't mean it's true. And then the conclusion. When the experiments are done, we still have to choose what to believe. In such a case, is awe, is wonder, is joy at scientific discoveries really possible? When I was thinking about this, A friend sent me the text of a speech given by Msgr Luigi Giussani about the love of being that is remarkably appropriate to this reflection. Msgr Giussani he is arguing that the truth of Christianity can be verified by a proper consideration of the evidence for it. Evidence, he says, is the correct word, even if the evidence for the Christian claim is given to us through signs. Signs are things that can be touched, seen, experienced. The apostles had Jesus in front of them, and this presence was a sign of his victory over death, and therefore of his mysterious identity. But what about us? What happens with the passage of time? What signs are there for us today as evidence of the truth of the Christian claim, of the reasonableness of the Christian claim? The interpretation of the signs available to us engages our liberty, says Father Giussani. In this drama, this freedom, this liberty, is a manifestation of our love for being. Without this love for being, we are not truly free, and we will never grasp the evidence of the signs given to us. And at this point, as an example of this love for being, Giussani invokes our friends, the Magi. He asks why the Magi decided to pursue the sign of the star. Why did they follow the impulse, that's his word, the impulse that they felt within themselves when they saw the star? Because they were full of love for being, says Giussani. This is the characteristic of those who are poor in spirit. The poor in spirit, he says, see, this is clear. Yeah, the poor in spirit. The poor in spirit is like a child who says yes to everything that is evidently present before him. It is a matter of not imposing our expectations to block our recognition that something unforeseen is happening, that it has happened. It is worthwhile to pursue its meaning. This is what made the Magi take off in their journey, he says, this opening or poverty of spirit, this childlike fascination, this amazement, this awe. The sign of the star unveiled a path to follow, a road to take. What determined this road for them was they traveled day and night on their camels with their presence, as they rested at night looking at the sky because they were perhaps not sleepy. What determined this way? It was following the path of the star which they could see. Still, recall that at one moment the star disappears. Why did they continue their search? Why not give up and go back home, losing interest in the search, figuring they had made a mistake? The star was gone, their enthusiasm, yet they continued. Obviously, it had not been the star itself, nor their intelligent calculations, nor their imagination, nor their enthusiasm that moved them. It was something that had happened, like they could not rationally deny had happened. The reason for their search was a kind of benevolence, says Don Giussani, a benevolence that guided them. The reason for following the road, the motivation, continuing the search for truth, was the initial event, that which had made them take off on their journey, so that they simply could not go back. Because you cannot make something that happened become something that has not happened. And so it is this poverty of spirit, this interior simplicity, this lack of fear of innocence, this spirit of the beggar that begs for the spiritual nourishment that truth communicates, this love for being that opens for us the grace of the gift of faith, that allows us to recognize the truth of the mystery of being. But is this interior attitude not also at the root of a scientific research, a love for science that protects it from the relativism that now threatens it? I recall the words of my dear friend Robert Pollock, professor of biological sciences at Columbia and director of the Center for the Study of Science and Religion, talking about precisely science informed by awe at our Crossroad Cultural Center here, September 9, 2009. Bob starts the day, he says, with the Jewish prayer. The beginning of wisdom is the awe of the Lord. In our Old Testament book of wisdom, we read that line, as the fear of the Lord is wisdom, and to depart from evil is understanding. In the text he quoted, it speaks of the awe of the Lord, not of fear. This awe, he said, was understood then as awe before the grandeur of nature, before its incomprehensibility, as in Psalm 92, recited by the Levitical priesthood in the temple on Shabbat. How vast are your works, O Lord! Your designs are beyond our grasp. However, according to Pollock, in this age of science, these are his words, we no longer have the luxury of this incomprehensibility. Consider this, a quote, I am not exaggerating the seriousness of this problem. Scientific insight into the meaninglessness of DNA-based life is not simply missing meaning. It is a demonstration that a satisfactory, even an elegant explanation of the workings of this aspect of nature actually conflicts with the assumption of purpose and meaning. Pollock thinks poets can understand this better than those not as skilled in self-awareness, and quotes from Edna St. Vincent Millay's poem, Spring. To what purpose, April, the month of April, to what purpose do you return again? Yes, the smell of the earth is good. It is apparent there is no death. What does that signify? Not only underground are the brains of men eaten by maggots. Life in itself is nothing, an empty cup, a flight of uncarpeted stairs. It is not enough that yearly down this hill April comes like an idiot, babbling and strewing flowers. Not a very positive view. Still, Pollock sees ground for awe. Where? In the human ethical choices, he says, that are in fact inexplicable in terms of nature. To freely perform actions on behalf of another that slip the constraints of natural selection. During a visit to a house where professional women live in community, freely embracing a life of poverty, of virginity and obedience, Dr. Pollock said to me that to freely choose such a life was an example of being able to escape the boundaries of natural selection. And that, he says, is also the intersect of awe and science. As I suggest, the path to a faith that expands the scope of reason beyond what scientific rationality allows. Once again, the capacity to experience awe or wonder is the path to the knowledge of reality made possible by faith. Wonderful thought? Well, it was known all along to St. Gregory of Nyssa, who comes even before St. Augustine, and who wrote the Life of Moses, in which he says, concepts create idols. Only wonder or awe knows. In an essay with the title, Only Wonder Knows, Father Giussani insists again, the capacity to wonder requires a simplicity of heart and a poverty of spirit, the attitude of a child that upon seeing something new, like a new star in the sky, searches out to it, touches it to explore it, without any ifs or buts. Wonder is the experience that John and Andrew felt when they first saw Jesus and decided to follow him. Faith is the affirmation of a fact, of the objectivity of a fact from which there emanates this aesthetics, a suggestivity that demonstrates human reason in action. Goodness or ethics, writes Giussani, derives from aesthetics, otherwise morality is alienating because it doesn't correspond to the desire of the heart that makes us human. It doesn't generate amazement, wonder, awe, leading instead to fear or to boredom. Sacrifices required by preconceptions is destructive of the self. Only a sacrifice motivated by wonder and awe, by an unexpected attractiveness of a presence, is consistent with being fully human. Ms. Aquinas put it bluntly, without grace the law of Christ is deadly. What is grace if not gracefulness, gentility? Yes, beauty to be discovered in nature in spite of the meaninglessness of the results of evolutionary science. The title of this presentation is whether a scientist today can meet the requirements of modern science and be a believer. The answer I propose is not only yes, he can, but in fact, it is faith that will sustain his or her passion for investigating nature and prevent the process itself and the results from becoming enslaved to political, economic, and even religious ideology. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Monsignor. Just being told that unfortunately we are late for our schedule and there is no real time for questions and answers here on the stage, but invite you, if you have questions, to talk with the speakers afterwards here in the room. I just want to conclude thanking all the speakers for their help because they share their experience on this fundamental topic. And since you, Monsignor, quoted the Magi example, I just wanted to say one thing that really struck me, that I read the homily of the Pope on the Epiphany, precisely, and he used this similar example, saying that the Magi actually, yes, he said...
That's why he called, he was checking out.
Aha!
He wanted to know whether his material was being used.
So, you are approved. No, I was just saying that, what struck me of what he said is that the Magi were scientists, were men that knew somehow that the star was a sign of something bigger. The reality holds a signature from God, a signature that man must seek to decipher, to know. And this is precisely where there is the union, from a scientist's point of view, this wonder in trying to understand an aspect of reality that at the same time brings something much bigger. Thank you. I really invite you to thank with me
Can I say something? I have a commercial thing.
A commercial thing, but I have an announcement also at the end.
Okay, but yours is, Helen Whitney is out there. Helen, thank you for coming. If you want to see the drama of trying to understand the reality, what we face today, the deep questions being asked, I recommend that on Palm Sunday and on Easter Sunday, you see Helen's new show on forgiveness at your local PBS station. I, of course, appear.
I have a very quick announcement. In this same room tonight at 8:30, there will be a New York night of images, readings, and music from the heart of the city, hosted by the Blues Brothers musician Lou Marini. And following the performance, Marco Luigi, the Vice Director and Congress Manager of the Rimini Meeting, will introduce the Rimini Meeting 2011 entitled "An Existence Becomes an Immense Certainty." And I just wanted to remind you also that this New York encounter can exist thanks to the work of more than 120 volunteers and the work of many, many people, and there have been a lot of expenses, so we warmly invite you, if possible, to give donations at the box at the entrance of the Manhattan Center. Thank you, and see you here at 8:30.